Eduardo Vasconcellos was the kind of man who made the world stop when he entered a room. Sharp suit, silver hair, and an expression so cold it could freeze fire. He wasn't just rich, he was powerful. The kind of power that came from fear, not respect. People didn't admire Eduardo, they obeyed him. From the outside, his life looked perfect. A mansion in Sao Paulo that looked more like a museum, a private jet, luxury cars parked like trophies, and an empire of private hospitals under his control. But behind those glass walls was a man imprisoned, not by the law, but by his own body. 5 years earlier, a car accident had taken away the one thing he couldn't buy back: the ability to walk. Since that day, Eduardo had become a ghost of himself. The once brilliant doctor turned entrepreneur now spent his days in a wheelchair, signing documents with one hand and clenching his anger with the other. He hated pity, hated weakness, and most of all, he hated the reflection of a man who wasn't in control anymore. Every morning he woke up to the same routine, his assistant rolling him to the window where he watched others walking freely through his garden. He used to whisper under his breath, "Enjoy it where you can." The staff feared him. A single misplaced item, a smudge on the glass or a late response, was enough to make someone lose their job. That morning was no different. Eduardo fired one of his oldest employees, the gardener, a man who had worked there for more than 20 years. "You had one job," Eduardo snapped, his voice sharp as a blade, "and you still managed to ruin my view with your dirty shoes. Get out! I don't want to see you again." The old man begged, his hands trembling. "Sir, please, my wife is sick. I need this job." Eduardo just smirked, tilting his head slightly. "And you should have thought about that before stepping on my grass." As the gardener walked away in tears, Eduardo turned his wheelchair toward the window again. Outside, the sun was shining, but he didn't feel it. He hadn't felt warmth, physical or emotional, in years. That's when his secretary, Marisa, entered the room holding a folder of medical reports. "Another test result came back, sir," she said softly. Eduardo didn't even look at her. "Let me guess. Another genius doctor who can't fix me." She hesitated. "They said there's no progress." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was hollow. "Of course not. Even God wouldn't dare fix me now." Marisa lowered her eyes, knowing better than to respond. And as she left the room, Eduardo stared at the portrait hanging on the wall, a little girl with brown curls and a bright smile. His daughter, Laura, gone too soon. The world thought Eduardo's pain came from his legs, but the truth was, his real paralysis started the day he lost her. The next morning, the air inside Eduardo's mansion felt heavier than usual. Even the ticking of the antique clock on the wall seemed to echo like a reminder that time was slipping away, and he, despite all his money, couldn't buy a single extra second of peace. He was sitting in his study, surrounded by marble floors and medical reports stacked like accusations. Names of the best doctors in the world filled those papers. People from Germany, Switzerland, Japan, all saying the same thing: permanent paralysis. Eduardo stared at the documents, his jaw tightening. "Permanent," he repeated bitterly, as if the word itself mocked him. On his desk lay a half-empty glass of whiskey, untouched since last night. He used to drink to forget, but lately, not even that helped. The silence around him was suffocating, broken only when Marisa entered the room holding her tablet. "Sir, Dr. Alberti is on the line," she said quietly. Eduardo's tone was ice cold. "Put him through." The doctor's voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Vasconcellos, we reviewed your latest MRI scans. Unfortunately, there's still no—" Eduardo cut him off. "No progress, no hope, no cure. You doctors are all the same. You charge millions to tell me what I already know. Sir, I understand your frustration, but your spinal injury is incurable. Yes, yes, I've heard that line 1,000 times. You people love that word. It keeps you from trying harder. He slammed his hand on the desk, the echo bouncing through the room. Do you know who I am, doctor? I own the hospitals you work for. I've funded research projects that your name wouldn't even appear in without me. And yet, none of you can fix me. There was a long pause before the doctor spoke again. Sometimes, Mr. Vasconcellos, healing doesn't come from where we expect it. Eduardo froze. For a brief second, his eyes softened. But only for a second. Then he laughed, cold and cruel. Spare me your fortune cookie wisdom, doctor. I didn't pay for sermons. He ended the call abruptly and tossed the tablet onto the desk. Marisa watched from the corner, her eyes full of quiet sadness. She worked for Eduardo for 15 years, long enough to remember the man before the accident. A father who used to smile, who once brought flowers to the office for no reason. That man was gone, replaced by someone who saw compassion as weakness. You may leave, Eduardo said, without looking at her. When the door closed, he wheeled himself toward the window again. Outside, the world kept moving. Gardeners trimming hedges, birds flying freely, people walking, all reminders of what he no longer had. He stared down at his legs, still, silent, lifeless. You betrayed me, he whispered, as if his own body had turned into an enemy. Then his gaze shifted to his daughter's portrait again. For the first time in years, his voice cracked. If you were here, Laura, maybe I wouldn't be this monster. He stayed there for a long time, trapped between anger and grief. And somewhere deep inside, though he'd never admit it, a small part of him wished someone, anyone, would prove him wrong. But he didn't know yet that the one person who would change his life forever was already on her way. And she wasn't a doctor. She was a little girl. It was a gray Thursday morning when something unusual happened at the gates of Eduardo's mansion. The guards had seen all sorts of visitors before. Investors, journalists, politicians, but never a little girl standing alone, holding a small paper bag and looking up with quiet determination. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. Her curly hair was tied into 2 messy braids. Her clothes were clean but worn. And her eyes, those eyes, held a kind of calm that didn't belong to a child. Sir, said the guard through the intercom, there's a little girl at the gate. Says she wants to see Mr. Vasconcellos. Eduardo was in the middle of a phone call when he heard it. He frowned, irritated. A child? What does she want? She says she can help you walk again. For a second, Eduardo thought he'd misheard. Then he burst into laughter, a dry, humorless sound that echoed through the room. What kind of nonsense is this? Send her away. I'm not interested in fairy tales. Yes, sir, the guard replied. But an hour later, the girl was still there, standing under the drizzle, refusing to leave. The guard returned, nervous. She's been waiting this whole time, sir. She says she won't leave until she talks to you personally. Eduardo's curiosity, buried under years of bitterness, flickered for a moment. There was something oddly persistent about that. Fine, he said, smirking. Let her in. Let's see what kind of circus this will be. A few minutes later, the massive wooden doors of the mansion opened. The girl walked through the marble hall as if she'd done it 1,000 times. No fear, no hesitation. When she entered Eduardo's office, he looked up from behind his desk, his eyes sharp, ready to humiliate. "So," he said slowly, "you're the miracle worker I've been waiting for." The girl nodded softly. "My name is Livia. I came to help you." Eduardo leaned back in his wheelchair, folding his arms. "Help me? Do you have any idea who I am, little girl? I've paid the best doctors on the planet. If they couldn't fix me, what makes you think you can?" Livia met his gaze without blinking. "Because I don't fix broken things," she said quietly. "I remind them how to work again." For a second, Eduardo forgot how to speak. The calm confidence in her voice unsettled him more than any insult ever could. "Do you even know how ridiculous that sounds?" he asked, half amused, half annoyed. "Maybe, but ridiculous things are sometimes the ones that work." Eduardo chuckled darkly. "All right then, let's make a deal. If you can somehow make me stand up again, I'll give you whatever you want. Money, a house, anything. But if you fail, you'll leave and never come back. Deal?" Livia didn't flinch. "I don't want your money," she said simply. "I want you to believe again." Her words hit him like a whisper he couldn't escape. Believe again? In what? God? People? Himself? Eduardo turned his chair toward the window, trying to hide the strange unease creeping into his chest. "Fine," he said finally, his voice low. "You've got one chance, little girl. Show me your miracle." Livia smiled faintly. "It's not my miracle, Mr. Vasconcellos. It's yours." He didn't know it yet, but that single meeting, that quiet little girl, would change everything. Eduardo leaned back in his chair, staring at the girl as if she were some strange creature that had wandered in from another world. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the rain outside. He finally smirked. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But tell me, little one, what exactly makes you think you can do what the world's best doctors couldn't?" Livia didn't look away. "Because they treat the body," she said softly, "but I speak to what's inside it." Eduardo laughed, a loud, mocking sound that echoed through the room. What kind of nonsense is this? Made the girl's calmness seem even more unsettling. "You speak to what's inside? What are you, some kind of magician? Psychic? Healer from the streets?" "No," she replied gently. "Just someone who knows that broken things can remember how to work again, if they're reminded with love." Her words hit him in a place he didn't know still existed. For a second, something flickered in his eyes, something like pain. But he quickly masked it with arrogance. "You really think love can fix a severed spinal cord?" he said sarcastically. "If that were true, I'd be running marathons by now." Livia didn't answer. Instead, she looked around his office. The shelves full of medical books, the walls lined with certificates and awards, the lifeless photo of him with important people who had all smiled for the cameras. Then her gaze landed on a small framed picture, the one of a little girl with curly brown hair and a wide smile. "Who is she?" Livia asked. Eduardo's expression changed instantly. "Don't touch that," he snapped, his tone sharper than a knife. Livia stepped back. I'm sorry. She looks kind." Eduardo clenched his jaw. "That's my daughter. She died years ago. And before you say something poetic, no, love didn't save her either." For the first time, Livia's calm faltered. She bowed her head, as if feeling his pain instead of just hearing it. "I didn't come to hurt you. I came to wake you up." "Wake me up?" Eduardo repeated, scoffing. "From what?" "From the idea that you're broken forever." He wheeled closer, his face just inches from hers.
"Listen, little girl," he said, his voice cold and trembling. "I've spent millions trying to walk again. I've been poked, cut, tested, and scanned more times than you can count. And every single one of those geniuses said the same thing. I'll never walk again. So forgive me if I don't put my faith in a child who probably doesn't even own a pair of shoes with holes." Livia didn't respond to the insult. She simply said, "Maybe they were wrong." The room fell silent again. Eduardo's lips parted, not in laughter this time, but in disbelief. "Wrong?" he repeated. "Do you even know who you're talking to?" "Yes," she said softly. "A man who used to heal others and forgot how to heal himself." The words hit harder than any argument. Eduardo froze. He hadn't told her he used to be a doctor. No one had. "How do you know that?" he asked quietly. Livia smiled. "Because pain has a smell, and yours smells like regret." For a moment, Eduardo didn't know whether to throw her out or ask her to stay. But deep down, something inside him, something that had been buried under years of anger, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this strange little girl wasn't crazy after all. "Fine," he said finally, his voice rough. "You want to wake me up? Go ahead. But if this is a game—" "It's not a game," Livia interrupted softly. "It's a chance." Eduardo stared at her for a long time. Then, slowly, a cruel smile crept back onto his face. "All right then, little miracle worker. Show me what you can do." And as Livia smiled gently, rain began to fall harder outside, as if the sky itself knew something extraordinary was about to begin. The room felt heavier than ever, as if the air itself could sense what was about to unfold. Eduardo sat in his wheelchair facing Livia like a king before a trial. The rain outside drummed against the windows, and every drop seemed to echo his disbelief. "So," he said, gesturing toward the countless medical charts spread across his desk, "before we start your miracle, let me educate you." He pressed a button, and the enormous screen on the wall came alive. X-rays, MRI scans, and medical diagrams appeared in glowing colors. "This," Eduardo said with a smirk, "is my spine. See that section? Completely destroyed. The best neurologists in the world tried everything. Surgeries, stem cell treatments, experimental therapies. I've spent more money than your family could dream of. And do you know what they all told me?" Livia stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the screen. "They said there's no hope." He leaned closer, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So tell me, little girl, what do you see that they don't?" Livia's answer was calm but sharp. "They look at what's broken. I look at what still remembers how to work again." Eduardo blinked. For a moment, her words seemed to cut through the walls of his logic. Then he laughed bitterly. "You talk like you've read too many fairy tales. This is the real world, not magic." "I know. That's why you stopped believing in anything that can't be measured." He frowned. "Believing doesn't make nerves regrow, Livia. Science does." "Then why are you still sitting?" she asked quietly. The words hit him like lightning. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, the great Eduardo Vasconcellos, the man who ruled hospitals, was speechless. "That's not how this works," he finally muttered, his voice tight. "My injury is permanent." "Permanent," Livia repeated. "You keep saying that word like it's a prison. What if it's just a door you locked yourself?" Eduardo's jaw tightened. "Enough of your riddles. You don't know anything about pain." Livia stepped closer, her small voice steady. "Pain doesn't scare me. I've seen people who lost everything and still smiled. You lost hope, Mr. Vasconcellos. That's worse than losing your legs." He turned his chair sharply, rolling toward the window, trying to escape her words. "You have no idea what I've been through." "Maybe not," she said. "But I know that when you stop trying, your body listens. You told yourself you'd never walk again, and it believed you." Eduardo spun his chair back toward her, his face flushed with anger. "Do you think this is about belief? This is biology, not faith." Livia didn't flinch. "Maybe that's your problem. You've been listening to the doctors so long that you forgot how to listen to yourself." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the rain. Eduardo's heart pounded, torn between fury and curiosity. This child, this tiny barefoot girl, was saying things no doctor had ever dared to say to him. Finally, he exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You know what? Fine. Let's play your little game. If you can make me feel anything in these legs, I'll give you 10 million, not one." Livia smiled faintly. "I told you I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" he asked, irritated. Her answer was almost a whisper. "I want you to remember who you were before you stopped believing in miracles." Eduardo froze. Something deep inside him, something buried under years of pain, guilt, and pride, stirred like an old wound reopening. He didn't know it yet, but the real battle had just begun. And it wasn't between a doctor and a patient. It was between a wounded man and the faith he'd buried long ago. That night, Eduardo couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, it wasn't pain keeping him awake. It was a voice. Livia's voice. "You told yourself you'd never walk again, and your body believed you." He had tried to laugh it off earlier, calling her words nonsense, but now they echoed in his head like a heartbeat he couldn't silence. He stared at the ceiling, the moonlight spilling across the room, and wondered why a 9-year-old's words had shaken him more than all the doctors in the world combined. Around 3 in the morning, he rolled his wheelchair to the large window overlooking the garden. The rain had stopped, and mist drifted above the grass. He looked down at his legs, pale, still, lifeless. "Remember who you were before you stopped believing in miracles." He whispered the words softly, almost afraid of them. For a brief second, he imagined what it would be like to stand again, to walk through the garden, to feel the earth under his feet. Then anger hit him like a wave. "Ridiculous," he muttered. "It's just childish nonsense." But no matter how hard he tried, the doubt was there, a small, stubborn spark in the middle of his darkness. By morning, that spark had turned into obsession. He ordered his driver to bring Livia back to the mansion. When she arrived, she looked exactly the same, calm, polite, and far too confident for someone so young. "Back so soon?" she asked, smiling gently. "I didn't sleep," Eduardo admitted, his tone more frustrated than he wanted to show. "Your words, they don't make sense, but I can't stop thinking about them." "That means they reached where logic can't," she said simply. He frowned. "I didn't ask for philosophy, girl. I asked for answers." "Then let's start with a question," she said. "When was the last time you tried to move your legs?" He scoffed. 5 years ago. The doctors told me it was pointless." "So you believed them," she said softly. "You stopped trying." Eduardo's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand. It's not about trying. It's about reality. My spinal cord is damaged. It's science." "And what if science hasn't discovered everything yet?" Livia asked, her tone calm but piercing. He wanted to argue, but something in her gaze made him hesitate. For the first time in years, someone wasn't afraid of him, and worse, she seemed to see right through him. "Fine," he said, crossing his arms. "Let's assume I wanted to try again. What would you have me do? Pray, sing, close my eyes, and pretend I'm healed?" "No," she said, stepping closer. "Just listen." "Listen to what?" "To yourself." "I didn't ask for philosophy, girl. I asked for answers." "Then let's start with a question," she said. "When was the last time you tried to move your legs?" He opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped. For the first time, he didn't feel angry. He felt, well, uncertain. And that uncertainty, that tiny crack in his wall of logic, was all it would take to let the light in. That night, long after Livia had gone home, Eduardo found himself sitting alone in silence, whispering a question.
He never thought he'd ask. What if she's right? The next morning, Eduardo woke up earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much, but something inside him had shifted. It wasn't peace, not yet, but a strange, uneasy curiosity. He rolled his wheelchair to the mirror and studied his reflection. The man looking back at him seemed older, smaller, and, for the first time, tired of fighting everyone, including himself. At exactly 10 o'clock, Livia arrived again. She carried nothing with her, no bag, no tools, no equipment. Just the same quiet confidence. "You came back," Eduardo said, his tone half amusement, half disbelief. "I told you I would," she replied. "Are you ready?" He smirked. "Ready to make a fool of myself?" "Sure." She walked over to the window, opened the curtains, and let the sunlight flood the room. "Then let's begin. I don't need your legs. I need your memory." "My memory?" "Yes," she said gently. "Close your eyes. Go back to the last time you walked. Not the accident, not the hospital. The last time you really walked. Freely." Eduardo hesitated, then exhaled deeply and did as she asked. For a moment, all he saw was darkness. Then slowly, fragments began to surface. A garden, laughter, small hands holding his. "My daughter," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Laura, we were feeding the birds." Livia nodded. "Good. Stay there. Feel it. Remember how it felt. Your steps, the air, the ground beneath your feet." He could almost smell the flowers again. He could almost hear her laughter echoing in the garden. His throat tightened. "I can remember," he murmured. "But it hurts." "It's not supposed to hurt," Livia said softly. "It's supposed to remind you that your body still remembers how to move." He frowned, opening his eyes. "Memories don't move muscles." "Maybe not," she said with a small smile. "But they wake up what's asleep." Eduardo wanted to argue, but then something strange happened. It was small, almost imperceptible. A flicker. A tiny tremor in his right leg. So light that he thought he imagined it. His heart skipped a beat. "What was that?" he whispered. "What did you feel?" Livia asked calmly. I don't know. A twitch. Probably nothing." "Or," she said, meeting his eyes, "maybe it was your body remembering." Eduardo stared at his legs, his pulse racing. For 5 years, they had been nothing but dead weight. Yet for a fleeting second, he could have sworn something inside them moved. "Do it again," he said quickly, his voice urgent. Livia smiled. "It's not me doing it, Mr. Vasconcellos. It's you." He sat in silence, torn between disbelief and hope. For years, he had mocked the idea of miracles. Now he was sitting face to face with one that felt real. As Livia turned to leave, she said softly, "Don't be afraid of what's waking up." When she left, Eduardo stayed there, staring at his legs until the sunlight faded. His hands were trembling, not from fear this time, but from something far more dangerous. Hope. The next day felt different. Even the air inside the mansion seemed charged with something invisible, something Eduardo couldn't explain. He hadn't told anyone what happened, not even Marisa. He didn't want to sound crazy, but all night long he had replayed that small, almost impossible twitch in his leg.
It was like a whisper from a world he no longer believed in. When Livia arrived that afternoon, he was already waiting for her in the middle of the study, away from his desk, away from the symbols of his power. This time, there were no sarcastic smiles, no cruel jokes. Just a man who desperately wanted to understand. I felt something yesterday. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was my imagination. Livia's eyes softened. Or maybe it was the beginning. The beginning of what? Of remembering, she said simply. Now, let's finish what we started. He nodded, his throat dry. Tell me what to do. Livia took a deep breath and knelt in front of him, her small hands resting gently on his knees. Close your eyes again. Don't think like a doctor, don't think like a businessman. Just be. Eduardo obeyed. For the first time, there was no resistance, no arrogance, just silence. Now, Livia whispered, talk to them. He frowned. To who? To your legs. Tell them you're sorry for giving up on them. Tell them you still need them. At first, he felt ridiculous. But then slowly, his voice came out, trembling, raw. I'm sorry. For treating you like you were dead? For hating you? For hating myself? I need you. I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you. The silence that followed was deafening. Then it happened. A sudden warmth, faint but unmistakable, spread through his thighs, down his knees, all the way to his ankles. Eduardo gasped, eyes flying open. What's happening? He whispered, panic and awe colliding in his chest. Livia didn't move. Her eyes stayed closed, her expression calm.
Can't handle, she said softly. It's just your body remembering how to live. Eduardo's breathing quickened. He could feel something, like electricity running through dormant wires. His legs trembled, just a little, but enough to make his heart race. Livia, his voice cracked. I can feel them. Her eyes opened, and for the first time, she smiled. A real, bright, childlike smile. Then don't stop now. Keep talking to them. Eduardo clenched the arms of his wheelchair, tears streaming down his face. Please, move, he whispered. Please, just once. And then, as if the world had been holding its breath, his right foot twitched. Then again. Stronger. Eduardo let out a sound between a sob and a laugh. Oh my God, it's real! Livia nodded, tears glistening in her own eyes. I told you, miracles don't come from outside. They come from within. For 5 long years, Eduardo had lived in silence, surrounded by money, power, and emptiness. But now, in a single moment of faith, something inside him broke open. Not his body, but his heart. And as he stared down at the trembling legs he had once cursed, Eduardo Vasconcellos realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to believe again. The mansion that once echoed with silence now felt alive again. For years, Eduardo Vasconcellos had lived surrounded by the finest things money could buy. But now, for the first time, he noticed the sound of birds outside, the warmth of the sun against the window, even the laughter of his staff echoing faintly through the halls. He had spent an entire night replaying the moment when his legs moved. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination. It was real. And yet, even more powerful than the movement was the feeling that came with it. That small, flickering spark of life returning to a place he thought was gone forever. When Livia arrived the next morning, she found Eduardo already waiting for her. No longer the cold, commanding figure she first met, but a man transformed by something he couldn't explain. I don't understand how this happened, he admitted softly, but I know it did. I felt it. I felt myself again. Livia smiled. That's because you remembered who you are. He studied her for a moment. You keep saying that. Remember. What does it mean? It means you were never truly broken. You just forgot you could heal. Her words hit him deeper than any diagnosis he had ever heard. He lowered his gaze, ashamed. I spent years blaming everyone, the doctors, God, even my daughter's death. But the truth is, I gave up on myself. Livia's eyes softened. Most people do when they're hurt, but miracles only happen when we start fighting again. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling. I thought money could buy everything, until I realized it couldn't buy hope. Hope doesn't come in exchange for money, Livia said quietly. It comes when we decide to open our hearts. That afternoon, Eduardo gathered his entire staff in the mansion's courtyard, something he hadn't done in years. The workers stood nervously, unsure why they had been called. He faced them from his wheelchair, but his tone was different. Gentle, sincere. Many of you have suffered because of me. I was angry at the world and I punished everyone around me. But I see now, the person who needed forgiveness the most was me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then slowly, Eduardo stood. His legs trembled, but he didn't care. Gasps filled the air as he straightened, gripping the arms of the chair only for balance. From now on, he said, his voice breaking with emotion, this house will no longer be a place of fear, but of gratitude. Because I've learned something money can't teach, that healing begins inside. Tears ran down the faces of the people who once feared him. Even Marisa, his loyal secretary, covered her mouth in disbelief. When he looked toward the garden, he saw Livia standing under the sunlight, smiling, the same calm, knowing smile she always had. Eduardo walked the few unsteady steps toward her, each one fueled by something more powerful than medicine. Faith. Thank you, he whispered. Livia shook her head gently. Don't thank me. You did it. He smiled through tears. Then why do I feel like you were sent to remind me? Maybe, she said, because sometimes even the strongest hearts forget how to beat. And as Eduardo looked out at the people he had once mistreated, he realized that healing wasn't just about walking again. It was about learning how to live and love again.
Called the man into his office. There was no cruelty in his tone, only humility. Mr. Pedro, Eduardo said quietly, I owe you an apology. You were right. People are worth more than the grass they step on. The old man's eyes filled with tears. You've changed, sir. Eduardo smiled gently. No, Pedro, I just remembered who I was before the pain. From that day on, Eduardo used his fortune for something entirely new. He created a foundation to help children who couldn't afford medical treatment, naming it the Livia Project. When the press asked who Livia was, Eduardo only smiled. She's the reason I can walk again. But more than that, she's the reason I can feel again. He never saw her after that last day in the garden. She had simply disappeared, leaving no trace, no address, no family, not even a last name. Sometimes, he wondered if she had been real at all, or if she had been an angel sent to wake him from the nightmare he'd created for himself. But every time he stepped into the garden, the same one where his daughter once laughed, he felt her presence, that same quiet peace she carried wherever she went. One morning, while watering the flowers himself, Eduardo noticed something strange. Beneath the largest oak tree, someone had placed a small wooden box. Inside was a folded note in delicate handwriting. Miracles don't happen to prove science wrong, Mr. Vasconcellos. They happened to remind people that the heart still knows what the mind forgot. Keep helping others remember too. L. Eduardo sat beneath that tree for a long time, holding the note, tears streaming down his face. For the first time, he understood. The miracle wasn't about walking again. It was about awakening. He looked toward the sky, smiling through his tears. Thank you, Livia, for teaching me to believe again. That afternoon, he gathered the children from his foundation in the garden. Some were in wheelchairs, others wore braces on their legs, but all of them carried hope in their eyes. Eduardo knelt among them, smiling. Do you know what the most powerful medicine in the world is? He asked. The children shook their heads. Belief, he said softly. Because once you believe you can, your body and your life start to listen. The wind brushed through the trees, and for a brief moment, Eduardo could almost hear Livia's voice carried in the breeze. You were never broken. You just forgot you could heal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eduardo watched the children play, laughter echoing through the garden. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something money could never buy. Peace.